Very good. So thank you for the kind intro, Max. It's a little bit of luck and a lot of people who have helped mentor along the way. So hopefully I can return the favor. To answer the question 3 times, this is the 3rd time I've got to present, and as encouragement to others and kind of the pitch for volunteering, it's a lot of fun. Like just the act of actually putting together what you want to talk about is truly enjoyable. And you get up in front of your friends and talk about it. There's really not any pressure or stress. So it thoroughly is enjoyable. So definitely would encourage you, and kudos to our leadership committee. A unanimous election is always a good sign that you're running things well. So keep up the great work, and definitely volunteer. It's what makes the club fun. So tonight we're going to talk about sports and/or action photography. It's not really limited. It's things that are in motion and typically moving. So wildlife, sports, rodeos, things like that. There's really no limit to it. Myself personally, enjoy the sports side of it, and it really stems from my kids when they were active in youth sports leagues. And so there'll be a slight slant to that, but most of this should be transferable pretty readily. Just for tonight's conversation too, feel free to interject with questions. I think we'll take them via the chat. I have the chat window up. If I miss it, I'm sure one of the other co-hosts here will call it out to me, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along the way. As part of that, we'll start with some of the caveats. There's a million ways to do anything, and this is my way. It's not the right way. It's just the way I prefer to do it. But this is an amalgamation of what I've learned from other people who are experienced and who are out there on the fields and out there involved in this type of stuff. And so this works for me. So keep that in mind, that you have poetic license to do what works for you. And these are simply things that I've learned over the year that I've tried to share and continue to share. So as part of that, like I said, many different approaches, but the real goal is to convey a story and to make you feel like you're part of the game or part of the action or there in real life. But unlike portraits, still lifes, even landscapes, action sports photography is very different. You're at the mercy of what's happening in the game and the speed of the game, as well as the action. Some games are particularly boring to shoot. That's just the nature of where it goes. Some games are absolutely thrilling, but that's part of the fun of this, is that you don't necessarily know what you're going to wind up with when you finish. So with that, we put together a 3-act play for tonight's discussion. And the first is the setup. So equipment. People in action photography get very, very passionate about equipment. So we'll talk about things that are equipment and settings and must-haves versus nice-to-haves. Then we'll transition and talk about the approach. So somewhat what and how to take your images. And that's 2 parts. There's the technical side of it, and then there's the creative side. And we'll delve into a little bit of each one of those. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is the edit. How do you pick your images? How do you edit them in a way that conveys that story? How do you, delete the ones that are so close but not good enough, and cry a little bit when you delete them? Some aspects of cropping. Cropping is very intrinsic to all photography. Sports is definitely a very key thing. And then for one of several controversial topics tonight, noise reduction, and noise reduction being your friend in this type of activity. So with that, Act 1, the setup and equipment. Part of this is, how do you solve getting set up to shoot high speed, sometimes low light, often low light sports without spending the equivalent of a small economy car? The reality is you can. And the technology continues to get better each and every year with new bodies, which is great, because that means the used market is chock full of very capable bodies that you can pick up for a small amount of money. I went out and looked at MVP.com, which is one of my go-tos for used gear. And you could get a Canon 1DX. I'm a Canon shooter. Canon 1DX used for about $1,100 with 2 batteries. And you could get a 70 to 200 2.8 lens for $1,000 used. So for $2,000, you're in the game. For a little bit more, you could get a variable aperture 100 to 400. Everybody makes one that's somewhere in that range. And used, those are about 1,500 or so. The limiting factor is the variable aperture, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But the reality of it is you don't have to get a home equity loan to do this. And more importantly, it's just getting out there and shooting. So with that, as we talk about equipment, what do you need? Well, fast focus, hands down, is the most important thing. You can make up for a lot of shortcomings in equipment. Fast focus is not one of them. I traded one of my bodies a few years ago because the focus was lacking. I couldn't take it anymore because soft picks are not keepers. It's amazing that when you get a fantastic picture and the jersey's in sharp focus and the face is blurry, it's pointless at that point. So that's a delete type of. More importantly, you don't want the focus locking on the referees or the fans in the stands and things like that. It's part of, the crow's feet around my eyes. Those are things that stress me out when I'm out there. And then for those that have some of the newer bodies, particularly the mirrorless ones, I will say in my experience, the eye focus works, and it works ridiculously well when used correctly. And that's part of it. Part of it is ensuring that you have it set up correctly and have played around with it. It even works well with helmeted players, so players like lacrosse or football and things like that. It does a pretty good job of actually locking onto, if not the face, or if not the eye, the helmet. I mentioned earlier a telephoto zoom lens. 7200 is a great starting off point. F2.8, so it's got to be big aperture that you can suck in a lot of light. Because even shooting in daylight, you're going to appreciate some of the separation that gives you from the background. You don't want to see all the noisiness in the background and of referees and other players standing on the sidelines. High frame rate. 5+ is usable. 7+ is great. 10+ is fantastic. The more frames you shoot, the more choices you have when going through your pictures. But as I've discovered, as I'm sure many of you have too, there can be too much. Many new bodies will shoot 20, 30, 50 frames a second. That is nightmarish to try and cull through an edit. So I have found myself dialing the frame rate down. 12 is about where I stay. I find that that's fast enough without being excessive. And then you have to keep in mind that your frame rates are the manufacturer's ratings, which is not necessarily real world when it comes to the lens that it's attached to, as well as your lighting conditions. If you're shooting at night under stadium lights, that will slow your focus no matter what you're shooting. You will lose some frame rate. So keep that in mind that if the body's advertising 14, 16, 20, it drops with that lighting. I stole this from a prior presentation. My next one, high ISO capability. I used to say 3200 to 6400 was really what you need to have. I have to update that and have you can shoot readily at 25,000 plus all day long with actual real usable images. And I'm not saying barely usable, completely usable image, and we'll show more later on that. And then a monopod. A monopod is very important, particularly heavy lenses. I shoot a lot with a 300 2.8 prime, which I think weighs 6 or 7 pounds, plus a body, plus a grip. I think it's 10-ish pounds. And I'm a big person. For those that have met me in person, it's still 10 pounds is still a lot to be dragging around up and down a field. So I like a quick release on my monopod. Some people don't. Some people prefer to screw theirs in. I have, I think it's I forget the brand name, but it's not an Arca plate. It truly locks in. I can hang the camera upside down and it's not coming out of the monopod. So let's talk about nice to have things. A vertical grip is nice to have, particularly to be able to shoot vertical much easier. It's oftentimes difficult to wrap your hand around and still be able to press your focus button and get good flexibility. Teleconverters, are often maligned. I think most manufacturers and their newer teleconverters are able to do an excellent job of having crisp images without any real image quality loss, but everyone's mileage varies a little bit on that. The next thing I would recommend is a shoulder strap versus a neck strap. The neck straps that come with every body are great. I have a drawer full of them that I've never used. I'm not a fan, but partially because the camera sits high on my chest. It's just size related. So shoulder straps are great too, because you can just simply set the camera down to your side without it being in the way of a second body. Rain covers. And this is an interesting one because I've been asked about this one repeatedly. I shoot a lot in the rain, and people, inquire, well, aren't you worried about your gear? And yeah, a little bit, but not really. It's a $40 cover basically keeps the camera bone dry. And if you're really nervous about it, you can buy Think Tank makes a nice one for about $200. But the reality of it is, most of the $40 ones do just great. I've used a trash bag in a pinch to cover up a camera. Knee pads, seat, or a cushion. My preference is a Home Depot bucket. It's actually a Lowe's bucket with a padded lid on it. It's twofold. I can carry stuff in it, as well as it gets me comfortable. My lower back isn't what it used to be, so I don't get as far down as I'd like to. On the equipment side, and this is a hot debate. This is one of the hot button topics for tonight. I am a preferred mechanical shutter user versus an electronic shutter, and I shoot a lot of ball sports. And part of that reason is the cameras I shoot don't have a global shutter, which means that the ball becomes oblong sometimes when using an electronic shutter, or the baseball bat becomes curved using an electronic shutter. They are blisteringly fast, though. So use whatever works for you. I prefer mechanical. I find the mechanical works a little bit better too on the next section too, which is combating the flicker on artificial lights. So oftentimes, if you've ever seen shooting at night, you'll have random blackouts, banding across the image, or blotches of orange and yellow image. It's the flickering of the lights. The lights cycle at 60 hertz a second. The cameras are so fast, it picks that up. Nikon, Canon, Sony all offer some level of flicker detection. You turn it on, and it basically causes the shutter to release when the light is cycled on. It's pretty common. I think for probably the last 12 years, most bodies have offered some level. Most prosumer bodies have offered some level of it. It does slow down your frame rate, so you have to keep that in mind. It will have an impact. All right, now let's get into the more fun stuff. That's kind of the what. This is more of the how. So how to approach a shot. This is the technical side of it. And by all means, if you have questions, please chime in via the chat. I'm keeping an eyeball on it too, but I'm sure my peers will call it up if I miss it. On the technical aspect, I am a firm user in back button focus. For those unfamiliar, back button is when you reassign one of the buttons on the back of your camera to be the focus only, versus halfway shutter to press, which is a default on the vast majority of cameras. So you turn off the shutter button actually starting the focusing and only use the button on the back of the camera to do that. The reason for that is the ability to continue to track the subject the entire time without actually shooting, and then only taking the shots when you're anticipating the action that you're looking for. Wears a little bit on the batteries, definitely puts a little more load on the batteries, particularly on the mirrorless cameras, but definitely allows you to do a much better job of tracking, particularly if your camera jumps from your subject to something else that you didn't want it to jump. You can release very quickly and press it right back, and hopefully it re-grabs focus of the subject you were looking for. Shutter speed, 1/1000th is about the minimum. There's a lot of different rules of thumb out there. One of them is 2x your focal length. So if you're shooting 400 millimeters, at least 1/800th. It's everyone has that. I found that's a good starting point. In some aspects, I've been able to drop down to 1/800th or 1/640th just to capture the image I'm looking for. But in daytime, it's well north of that. It's 2,000, 4,000th of a second. But at night, which is usually going to be most challenging, you still need at least a minimum of about 1/1000th to freeze the action. And so the photo of the swimmer here is great. You can see, the droplets right in front of their face as they're slipping through the water. Eyes are sharp and in focus and that. And so they're moving so quickly. You've got to be able to get that. And so they're only at that point in the stroke for a millisecond. So as you're shooting, you need to be able to freeze and stop that point. On aperture, I tend to open as wide as possible, particularly at night. I probably shoot 3/4 of my stuff at night under the lights. I love it when I get a daytime game. It's infrequent. And so shooting at f2.8, f4, on occasion if I'm using a teleconverter, but just keep it wide open. From a frames per second, keep it set at the maximum. We talked a little bit earlier about electronic shutters that can go very, very fast, 20 plus per second. You can always, some of those have the ability to dial them back in the menu. You can set a lower threshold, but keep in mind every picture you take, you have to review to see if you want to keep it or not. The other part too is learning to shoot in bursts versus what's referred to as spray and pray. I typically shoot in 3 to 5 image bursts, which I just don't even think about it. I know how long to hold the shutter to get it to take that 3 to 5 image capture, because I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that set of action that comes into telling the story, which is going to be our next part. I don't want to edit. I used to early on, 15 plus years ago, I did this. I'd shoot 3,000, 4,000 images in a game and then hate life for the next day and a half while I culled through all those images. JPEG versus RAW, hotly contested. Those of you might know Tim Davis. He was a member of the club until recently. He bowed out just because he couldn't make the commutes and things like that. But Tim's also an avid local sports photographer. He and I like to debate this frequently on the sidelines in between action. He's a RAW shooter. I'm a JPEG shooter. It's whatever works for you. I prefer the JPEG for 2 reasons. One, smaller file size when I'm editing, and because I'm usually editing with haste. I'm trying to get things out for Instagram, for school websites, things like that. So I don't have days to edit. And then the other aspect is, and this is where Tim cedes the point to me, Canon's in-camera noise reduction on JPEG is phenomenal. And so I let that do the work for me when I'm shooting at night in low light. So whatever works for you, that's just my preference. You can make it work for you too. To go back to Max's comment in the intro, any of the photos that I've won ribbons or awards with that are sports photos were all shot in JPEG. None of them were ever shot raw. Nights and indoors. I am also a significant fan of setting auto ISO with a minimum shutter speed. And so most cameras allow you to say, hey, set a minimum shutter speed of 1/1000th, and then let the ISO compensate for everything else. So I'll shoot in manual. I'll pick the shutter speed, what I want. I already said I'm shooting wide open aperture, so I have 2.8 and let it go. Basically, I look at that within the exposure triangle as ISO is my only variable. That's the only thing will change. And I'll put a ceiling on it. You'll laugh when I tell you the ceiling, it's 51,000, but it works. And very infrequently does it get up there, but every now and then in a shadowy end zone, it'll hit 40,000 on ISO and still have a very usable image. So that was the technical side. Let's talk about the creative side. I got a question popped in from Roxanne about, can you explain FPS a little bit more? Certainly. FPS, frames per second. So many cameras, particularly the prosumer level, and that shoot a high number of frames in any given second. And in an action sequence, when learning a lot about this, it's very common to watch action develop and hold the shutter button down continuously and take a very, very long sequence. which you then have to then edit and at least delete the ones you don't want. So by minimizing how much you're actually shooting, you're using the speed of the camera, but not taking a 20 photo series. You're taking 3 photos, 5 photos, and then very quickly again, 3 photos, 5 photos. It helps limit the amount of post-processing work you have to do to get your images out. Hopefully that addressed your question. If not, pop it back into the chat. I'll come back to it. Thank you. Oh, Carol Wright has a great question. What focal point do you prefer? Single point, auto select with many focus points? That's a great question, Carol. Thanks for asking that. The answer is it depends, but I'll be much more specific than that. It depends on what.
It's Wayne. Hey, Derek, it's Wayne.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
That's my wife, Carol. For some reason,
gotcha, Wayne.
Thank you, man.
You bet. Anytime. Thank you. So swimming is single point. So I shoot mirrorless. I still shoot a DSLR as my secondary body, but I shoot mirrorless. I shoot a Canon R6, and swimming is single point because I'm looking for just their face and the water droplets that are going everywhere while they're stroking through the water cause the focus to go haywire and want to grab those water droplets. For ball sports, field sports, lacrosse, soccer, football, I will typically shoot zoned. So I'll pick center zone because I'm usually able to track the action well enough that I'm not worried about what's happening on the fringe. And then things like baseball, basketball, it's everything. Every focus point that's available to me is going on because typically that action is so compressed that you're basically hunting for somebody's eyeball and you want to let the camera find somebody's eyeball. So, Wayne, hopefully that answered your question. So, Jerry says camera buffer size and card speed can also make it an issue with faster FPS. Absolutely. Great call, Jerry, especially if you're shooting in RAW. My camera's RAW images are 30 meg files versus like an 8 meg JPEG file. And I think my cards run at, they'll write at, I think it's 120 a second. So yeah, you could absolutely get to that point where, 30, 40 images in, you're completely buffered out waiting for the camera to keep writing. So, it's also a benefit for the JPEG argument versus the RAW argument. Coming back to Roxanne's question, the difference between burst and spray and pray, absolutely, I can delve into that a little bit more. Spray and pray is truly just you're pointing the camera in the direction and just hoping you catch something. You're just shooting because there's some action happening, but it's not specific action. And we'll talk a little bit more here about this in the creative front because not all action is created equal. The bursts are once you've developed that feel for what you're looking for from an action standpoint. So it could be surfing, right? When you're surfing, when somebody's out on the surf, and a lot of people here have shot surfing, you're typically not taking shots as they're getting up on the wave. There's just nothing exciting about it, right? You're going to wait till they get into the wave and start riding the wave and they start carving the wave. Those are typically the times where you're going to start taking bursts of that action in the wave versus starting a shot sequence right when they get up on the board for the next 5 or 10 seconds, because you're wind up with an awful lot of images that are just not really storytelling. And so it's learning to anticipate what the subject is doing and starting a short burst, 3 to 5 images right when that action sequence happens. So hopefully that helped. So pivoting to the creative side, creative perspective, I have some hard rules that I typically don't deviate from. So the focus has to be on the eyes and the face, and there needs to be ball and or action in the shot. There are deviations to that, and I'll share some in some of my images here, but for the most part, that's a hard and fast rule for me. I oftentimes see newer action photographers shooting people's backsides, the back of their head. It's an uncompelling image. It could be amazing action, but if there's not a face involved, it lacks the human element. So here's a great example of lacking the human element. basketball shot this a couple weeks ago. Kid's going up for a layup. Other kid steps in front for a foul. So get both players, but neither one of their faces is really in the shot. So not so good. And the ball's cut off. That's also not so good. We'll talk about that too. Comparably, same situation. The defender's taking the foul. Offensive players going in for the layup. You can at least see the eyes and the focus locked in on it. So now you've got something to work with. I'm not a fan of this image, but it matched up well with the first image. So it was more the comparison than anything. So eyeballs are essential. Perspective, getting low. I told you about my Home Depot bucket earlier, and that's not a joke. I truly have a Home Depot bucket that I sit on. That plays heavily into the perspective of the image. And Helen, I saw your question. I'll come to it in 1 second here. So the perspective matters, particularly the horizon line. I'm 6'5", so I'm taller than most. And so when I am standing up, I'm shooting down onto my subjects. And so by shooting down on a player who's 5'9", 5'10", and that you can see how high the horizon line is in the back of that image, and you lose out on what I like to call the superhero quality. If you get down low, and I say low, sitting on a bucket, now all of a sudden you have superhero quality. You're shooting up into the player. You typically get a better vantage point at their face, and you actually get the ability to truly get a sense of scale. Like it just that little shift in how high or how low you're shooting has a dramatic impact on the overall feel. So in the chat, Helen has asked, you mentioned back button focus. Do you use a single back button focus for the mirrorless, or do you have a 2 back button setup? One for the eyes, one for the other. Helen, you're a shooter after my own heart. So yes, absolutely, I do. I use the autofocus back button on my camera, and then I've reassigned the exposure lock to be eye focus. And so I do absolutely do that. So I can be in the middle of a sequence or a series and shift from whatever zone I have set up on the back button focus to be eye focus. And thankfully those buttons are right next to each other, and I have big fat thumbs. So I literally just roll from one to the other and it shifts automatically. Typically I'll do that, especially like in sequences like the images that are up on the screen here. They get close enough to that I know I can truly lock their eye. I'll shift from the zone to the eyeball focus, and the cameras are so quick that it does an impressive job of it. Roxanne thought the Home Depot bucket was patented by Linda Caden in wildlife shooting. So Mark Hodgson has a question. How do you get on the field for football games and many other sports events without a press pass? Well, you don't. So you have to do the networking. So part of it is doing things that benefit others. So I give athletic directors images for their social media. That's my trade-off. So they get to know me. They know I do good images. They know I do good work. They know I'm not a crazy parent. I'm a known entity from my kids though too, so that helps. But I know in my area, I know all the athletic directors at all the high schools, and I literally shoot them an email. Go, hey, I'd like to come shoot this game, and they give me field access and admission to the game for free. In turn, I usually give them 5 to 6 images that they can use in their social media, and I give them the license without charge. And that's how it builds. It's not that you're shooting for free per se, but you got to give a little to get a little. And now it's the point where I'm well enough known that I get asked to come shoot, individuals all the time. So I've got next Tuesday I have one that's wants to come shoot a kid. I'll only, if I'm shooting for specific individuals, I'll only take 3 on per game because I can't keep track of them. If I'm shooting the team, that's a different setup. That's a different, pricing structure tier. But if it's individuals, it's one rate for a single person, and then I discount the rate if they can get 2 other parents to jump in as well. but that's really it. Is you got to work your way through that. I know there's a number of other folks here who shot for jumbo shrimp. Couple folks who've gotten NFL credentials, things like that. It's you have to work your way up and have a portfolio. But school is a great place to start. There's not a ton of money to be made. I don't do it for the money. I only charge people so that way I don't get taken advantage of and asked to come out and do things willy-nilly. But that's really the key thing is to do a little pro bono for the school, and then it comes back around. But what I've always done is never been a detriment. Like, photographers should be invisible on the sidelines, and a lot of times some of the up and coming aren't, and that's a very quick way to get yourself disinvited from the sideline. I think we're clear on questions. Come back to the creative perspective. I talked about shooting in bursts, so not all action is equal, and you have to anticipate the action. And part of that's knowing what you're shooting, whether it's surfing or rodeo or football. You have to understand what it is and how to expect it. Anytime I shoot something new that I don't have a lot of familiarity in, volleyball is a great example. I am terrible at volleyball shooting because I just don't know the game well enough to anticipate the action. I aspire to get better, but I'm not there yet. So that's part of it. So great example. I'm an actual ex-swimmer. Both of my kids were swimmers. This is in the backstroke world, the shot that everybody wants during the backstroke start, where the swimmer's completely inverted, locked on the eyeballs. You see the rippling muscles in their legs, their arms, everything, that tension of them as they're about to launch off of the wall. It's a fun shot to get, but you have to know and be able to anticipate how that's going to unfold. And so going back to Roxanne's question on a burst, this is the moment I hear the starting horn, it's like a quick 5-shot burst, and I'll usually get this image in that. That's all I'll shoot. I'll shoot the 5-shot. Like, once they break that arc in the plan, I stop shooting because everything else is just a big giant splash. Additionally, too, another one here, this is on the first lap of any of these races, the water in front of the swimmer is dead calm. The water behind is extremely turbulent from their stroke. And so to be able to catch that moment where you've got the contrasting part of the image where it's smooth and calm in front, where you see the reflection of the athlete, and behind is just a bubbly mess. That's just part of the anticipation, right? And part of that action. So it's not extremely high action at that point, but in that sport, it's a split second that they're back above water as they're coming through the stroke. And we talked a little bit earlier about vertical shooting, and vertical shooting is often better than horizontal shooting for sports because you're able to fill the frame a little bit more. When I shoot landscape, I chop a lot off the sides. And so talked about the backstroke start as an example of that. So that's a great vertical shot. You can get more into the frame. Cross country, track and field, vertical. That way you get the entire athlete in frame. You're not wasting megapixels on things you're going to crop out. Basketball is another good one that vertical, you get more and more of that. And going back to the question earlier about focus points, when you're shooting vertical, you can use them all in most cases. You don't have to worry so much about what zone or what selection you're picking on. You can take them all because effectively everything should be in frame. The last part is a little bit more just the pulling us all together. So start shooting before you see something happen. If you wait until you think something will happen, you're going to miss. Especially in mirrorless, there's that millisecond lag in the optical viewfinder on mirrorless. So you have to almost retrain yourself if you make the pivot from DSLR to mirrorless in sports. You have to come to terms with the fact that you're only going to get a keeper rate of about 10%. And 10% doesn't mean that it's not in focus and not a clear, crisp image. It just means that it's going to actually tell the story that you're looking for. You're going to delete a lot. and then keep shooting after the play. The celebrations and the agony of defeat are often very compelling images, because that's truly where the emotion comes out. That's where you're able to start truly telling the stories apart. There was a fantastic image earlier on that somebody shot from Surfer Girl in the slideshow today. That great image, and it was clearly after riding the wave, but the person was coming in to the beach after riding the wave. Fantastic image. Had nothing to do with the actual riding the wave, but it was a great image. So I'm not sure who shot that, but kudos to you. It was well done. So I stole this from an old presentation. This might be one of my kids playing lacrosse and then getting the absolute daylights beat out of them into it. And so you got to just keep shooting, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so as part of that, you shoot, this is a bit of what you would call spray and pray, but there was something unfolding there, and you don't know when he's going to release that shot. You also didn't realize he was going to get creamed by the defender. And so invariably, though, you end up with a couple of final images that actually end up being worthwhile. The rest just get deleted. He hates both of these, but every now and then I dust them off, just because, as parents, we get to torture our kids. So celebration is one of my favorites. I'm not going to lie. It's my cheat code for photo competitions. This one's won a couple different competitions, and this was a little bit of dumb luck because I break my own rules. I'm standing up. It's right at the beginning of the second half, so I'm actually coming back from getting a water break myself, and I literally grabbed my 70-200, like my backup camera, 7200, and right after the goal got shot, and just started shooting the celebration. Totally missed the goal. Didn't get anywhere near it. I wasn't even ready for it. I just started shooting the celebration and managed to capture this one. So a little bit of luck, but also a little bit of knowing that there's going to be a celebration. So same thing too, big score, big defensive stop, whatever it is, right? That, players are prone to celebrate, right? They're excited. So, keep shooting after the play, and then just truly what you're looking for is capturing that split second of just, unbridled joy, unbridled excitement. And, you got to anticipate it. Conversely, the agony of defeat also shows that. I will say that I have one rule. I will not shoot injured players. I absolutely won't. That's just, can't do it. So keep that in mind. That's not in fair game of agony of defeat, though. But this was at the end of the girls' state soccer championship. The opposing goalie, who lost, unfortunately, just having her moment. This was at the finish of invitational, cross-country invitational called the Balin Trail. That's the number 1 and number 2 runner. You could tell who won and who didn't. And then same here, not an injury. Both players are fine, but the look of discomfort and pain on the striker's face as he ran into the goalie is irrefutable. Moving on to Act 3. So post-processing the editing. We're going to talk about 3 things. So image selection and deletion, cropping, and noise reduction. So this, instead of being called image selection, we should call this how to delete. It's a very painful process because you're going to delete a lot of really nice pictures that just don't tell a story or aren't compelling. I've found in my experience to expect about 10% of 10% of the total images taken, with 2 to 3% of those being actual selects that you would use. So average field game, about 1,000 images, typically get down to 100 that I think are worth editing. And then once I actually go through the editing process, only 30 actually get maintained, and then everything else gets deleted. Going back to picking shots that follow the eyes, ball action recipe. Celebrations are kind of that anomaly. Agony and defeat part of that anomaly too, but if it's truly the action side of it, you want to stick to those. Pick shots that show dynamic action. So runner with both feet off the ground. I'll come back to a couple pages here real quick because I failed to drop an image in here, but I am huge on this. Oftentimes you'll get runners with, and on the left, he's got one leg down and straight. It's okay. But if you get them with both feet off the ground, that truly makes a difference. And so invariably, if there's a straight leg in the equation, it's usually not a keeper. But it's little things like that you learn to develop, because both feet off the ground shows a whole level of action that you're typically not going to get just going through with that stiff leg, and you'll see it after a while. And then lastly, delete anything that's not part of your recipe of action, ball, and eyes. Anything with soft or misfocus, I don't care how amazing the action is, everyone's going to look at it and go, it's soft. I've had hundreds, probably more than that are like that, where it's so amazing and I misfocus. It happens. Truncated limbs, they look off. They just, like, something about it, like where, somebody's missing their forearm. It doesn't work. And then lastly, just simply boring or duplicative. Like, is it the same thing that somebody could shoot with their iPhone? Is there anything interesting about it? I know a lot of photographers who love shooting players on the sidelines cheering on their teammates. It's great. It's a snapshot, though. It's boring. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it. So, cropping as part of this, crop in tightly, and then crop some more, and then crop again. You can't typically overcrop an action photo. But with that, don't cut off their limbs, and give them some space in the frame. One of our judges talked about that in the last photo competition. I think it was a surfing image, if I remember correctly, where it was a great image, but it was so tightly cropped that at the top there wasn't room for the surfer coming up the wave, and so he used the generative fill to give a little space up top and definitely improve the image. It was great. So you want to give a little bit of space. Straighten the horizon. It has a huge impact on the image. There's a budding sports photographer I shoot with frequently who's not part of the club, and I can't beat it into his head enough to straighten his horizon. He takes some very, very great images, but every time you look at them and the horizon's crooked, it makes me twitch. And the reason for it is because it looks off. Anyone that picks it up, especially if you're a photographer, you look at it and go, it's crooked. So, aspect ratio. This one more so now than ever is subjective. Be creative. Pretty much every sports photo I'll crop to 1 by 1 because I'm focusing on a person. If it's vertical, I'll usually get it down to 4 by 5 in a vertical format. Those lend themselves very well to mobile devices, which is what my target audience is. They lend themselves to eliminating the extraneous parts of the picture that aren't part of the story, and ultimately drive the outcomes I want. But be creative. I've done extremely long crops too, where it's like 16 by 9, like crazy wide. Be creative. It's really what you think favors the storyline. And then just a technical piece on this: when you're cropping and then exporting, social media and online media does not support full resolution. Never has. And so when you're going to post your photos onto, if it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, it doesn't matter. They all will compress your photo, and they will compress it in ways that do hideous things to the image quality. So I personally just do an end around on that. And when I export my photos, I do 2 different exports. I do a full res for somebody who's printing, and then I do a social media export. The social media is typically usually no more than 2048 pixels wide, and that's the limiting factor is the width. It's 2048 pixels. But keep that in mind. Like if you export something that's some of these high res cameras, 50 megapixel, things like that, where it's 6,000 by 4,000, the social media will go ahead and automatically compress it for you in very ugly ways. So we talked about the cropping. Coming back to that a little bit more. This was a assignment. 46 was one of mine that I was getting shots of. This is 400 millimeters, other side of the field. just made a big tackle, but the tackle was from behind, so it's a junk picture. But you keep shooting afterwards, bring in a tight crop, and you can see it's a heavy crop. I mean, there's a lot of, it's at 400 millimeters. That's a lot of throwaway, but now I have a keeper for the person who wants their picture celebrating their tackle. So it looks like you're throwing away a lot of the image, but in this space, you really want to get in particularly tight. And then all of the software out there, Photoshop, Lightroom, Topaz, On1, all the really favors if you crop your image first before you actually edit. The color grading and things like that tend to do better once you've removed parts of the image that are not actually going to be edited. So definitely crop first. Plus, it doesn't throw things like your white balance off. Noise reduction. This one is always, somebody's going to debate me on this somewhere along the way, and I welcome it. I've always been a huge fan of noise reduction, particularly for nighttime games. Becky asked, if someone wants to print this heavily cropped image, what are they limited with size? Typically, no. I have upstairs here in my house, I have a 3 foot by 4 foot canvas of a picture that I took with a 12 megapixel Nikon 15, 18 years ago. And it's crystal clear at 3 foot by 4 foot. I'm 12 megapixel. So that's probably still going to be, even after that crop, that's probably still going to be a 8 megapixel picture. And you could easily go 20 by 30 without any issue. But that's a good question. You will hit a limit. It's not infinite, but you will hit a limit. Most of them are looking for things that are, 16 by 20, poster-ish. But you get what you got. That goes back to my opening statement that you're at the mercy of what's going on the field sometimes. So noise reduction. So we'll use some real world examples here. And this is zoomed in 1 to 2, no noise reduction on the original image. Here it is with noise reduction. And for those that are interested, I threw in the settings here. I'm primarily a Lightroom user for sports photography. I use Photoshop only when pressed, but usually it's Lightroom. So this was 400 millimeters as well. Variable aperture lens, so f5.6, 32,000 ISO. And here's the actual images without noise reduction. Still pretty good, still pretty usable. But a little bit of noise reduction cleans up the background, gets some of the graininess out of it, sharpens up the letters on the jersey, sharpens up the lines on the face, and totally ecstatic with the image. Not only me, but the person who wanted the image. So don't be afraid to shoot high ISO with modern bodies. When I say modern, the last 3-4 years, you can go absolutely ridiculous with them. Yeah, Topaz gigapixel. Yeah, that's Jerry says Topaz is impressive. I did a trial version of it. For those sharp eyes, they'll see here on this that noise reduction through Lightroom. Lightroom has its own AI-driven denoise. Not compatible with this format. It's not compatible with JPEG, and this is a JPEG, as I mentioned earlier. So you could do that. And then Max chimed in with noise reduction impacts JPEGs. Absolutely. Absolutely. You get a little more flexibility with the raw, a little more fine tuning. But I've gotten to the point now, Max, and I'll own it, that this is actually a preset for me in Lightroom that I made. And it's just, I click it. Anything over about 25,000, I just click this and then I go back and look at it. And usually I dial it down, not up. But this is the most I'll do on noise reduction, because anything more than this starts to create really soft images and really impacts detail. So back to the finals. And then that brings us pretty much to the end. So other questions that we can jump into. I'm happy to answer anything.
Did you ever used to do any film?
Yes, when I was in grade school. If you read over there's a Pentax, an old Pentax film camera sitting on the shelf over there. I don't think it's been used in 30 years. So, but I never shot. Sports via film, so that is not a skill I possess, and I would probably be broke if I tried to. What else? Helen asks, what do you shoot these sports photos with? What's your go-to lens for these? I'm currently shooting a Canon 6R6, which is I think it's their entry-level full frame still. It's about 3-4 years old. And then as far as lens, it depends. There's three that are go-to. So it's a 300 millimeter prime, a 100 to 400 variable aperture, and 70 to 200, 2.8. So those are the three. I probably use the 70 to 200 and the 300 prime the most. And if the lighting is particularly good, I'll slap a telly on. I'll slap a 1.4 telly on the 300 prime, which makes it 420. I just shot at Beachside High School, which is one of the newer high schools in St. Johns County, and they have lighting that is equivalent to daylight on their sports field. It's absolutely, utterly amazing. It's all LED. It's all state-of-the-art lighting, and they have 4 light towers that illuminate the whole field like it's daylight. So that by far is not the norm. And so that one I get away. It's very easy to slap a telly on there and go down to f4 on the prime lens. But that's not always the case. Scott said that was a ton of good information. Thank you, Scott. Helen asking him, what do you prefer most for the water shots? Ooh, great question. Water's typically shot in daytime. I've shot a few nighttime events. So like the state competitions are outdoors and they're held at night. When I'm shooting those, it's a 300 prime, 300 2.8 prime. But if it's daytime, my go-to is the 100 to 400. Because that truly allows me to compose in camera. Like it limits my cropping. I'm able to get the framing that I want on the athlete. But that has to be daytime, daylight.
You have to get pretty low for the water sports, right?
Yeah, so you have to get wet too. It just kind of goes with the territory. So I have a little like gardening knee pad, like a 24-inch like closed cell foam knee pad that I lay down on the pool deck, and I will lay my chest on top of that. So I'm about an inch off of the pool deck, and I will shoot from the pool deck level. Getting up's the hard part. Getting down there is easy. Standing back up is the more difficult piece. So. And keep in mind, a lot of these things I'm sharing, again, completely applicable to, horse shows, rodeos, surfing, running events, auto racing, auto sports. I've started delving into motorsports a little bit over the last couple of years. So, and there's great places. I mean, Gainesville Raceway is, 90 minutes from Jax. It's pretty easy to get to. They have all kinds of things that go on out there. Sebring's not too far. Daytona, I know a number of people make the trip to Daytona for the various events that are down there. So it's not limited to just ball sports or field sports. Any other questions?
A lot of good stuff. Thanks a lot, Derek.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. That's a lot of fun to share with you guys. So
I was just going to ask her, what's your favorite sport?
It depends. I'll give you a true answer though. What my favorite is watching teams or teams in particular that play ridiculously well together. That it's very harmonious and almost like a symphony. Those are probably the most because they truly are fun to shoot because you can see things unfolding. You can watch the plays unfolding. Like you get the sense for, oh, they're going to cross the ball over to this person who's streaking down the side, and no one else has really caught that person yet. So those are the most fun. As far as the actual sports themselves, I'm kind of agnostic. I enjoy them all, except for that volleyball. That seems to be my Achilles heel still. It's tough. It's tough. Try it sometime. I encourage everyone to try it, but it's not easy.
Very good. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much,
Yeah,
Derek.
thank you all very much. If you have any questions, you can hit me up offline, or shoot me an email or Facebook message or whatever. Happy to share what I know or what I think.
Well, with that, Derek, I think it's just thank you for all your time tonight and for all the work you've done for the club. And thank everybody for joining us. And again, we'll look forward to your next presentation to the Beaches Photography Club. Everybody have a good, dry evening. Good night.
Night, y'all.